If you're looking for an EU second passport route, France and Luxembourg seem very similar at first glance. They both let you apply after 5 years, keep the passport you already have, and they're both in the Schengen area. So on paper, you're choosing between what looks like two versions of the same thing, but in practice, they're very different, and those differences really matter. By the end of this video, you'll know which of the two is genuinely faster, which is cheaper, which you can realistically get into, and which one actually fits the life you want. I'll take you through what each country tests you on, how long each one takes to answer you once you've applied, and what can get you refused. There's also a French requirement that isn't written into any law, and it decides more applications than anything else I'm going to cover. Let's get started. If you're planning to move to Luxembourg and live on money that you already have, instead of taking a job there, there's a condition about where that money has to come from. It catches a lot of Americans and Brits in particular, and I'll come to exactly how it works near the end of the video. In short, Luxembourg asks where your money came from, not where you're from. So let's look at Luxembourg first because it's the shorter list. First off, you need 5 years of legal residency, and the last year before you apply has to be unbroken. Then you need to pass the Luxembourgish language test, and you also need a certificate for a civics course, which you can either attend or replace by passing an exam on the same material. There's also a good character condition, which mostly comes down to having a clean criminal record. The process itself is free of charge. You apply in person to the registrar in the town where you live in Luxembourg, and that's important because you have to do it in person. You can't get anyone else to go for you. Now, France also asks for a minimum 5 years of residency. But on top of that, you need French language at B2 level, which is quite high, passing a civics exam, an assessment of how well you've settled into France and integrated, and an interview, of course, conducted in French. And it'll cost you, at the time of this video, €255 to apply. Next up, there's the timing, which is the first big difference. Luxembourg's Minister of Justice has to give you an answer within 8 months of the day you apply, whereas France gives itself up to 18 months, and the French clock doesn't start until your file is complete. There's one Luxembourg rule that catches people before anyone has even looked at their application. If you hand in your file and something is missing, the registrar will tell you what to send, and you then have 3 months to send it. If you miss that deadline, your application won't be considered at all. So the document list matters a lot more than people expect. You need to have your birth certificate and your passport, a signed questionnaire about your background, your language proof and civic certificates, and proof of clean criminal record certificates from countries where you have nationality and have lived in since you've turned 18. And I think that goes back for a period of 15 years, but best to double check in case that's changed. That last one can be a bit tricky if you've lived in many places. It can take a long time to get that paperwork. So if you're about to start the process, I'd recommend doing that part before anything else. Now, France wants its own version of all this, and the French process runs mostly online rather than in person. The paperwork is heavy on both sides, but that's pretty normal. Language is where they really differ, and it doesn't go the way that most people expect. Luxembourg asks for a lower level of language skills compared to France, but arguably it's still the harder of the two to prepare for. The Luxembourgish test is run by the National Language Institute, and it tests you at A2 level for speaking and B1 for listening, so you have to be able to understand more than you have to actually speak. A2 speaking is a fairly low bar. It covers things like ordering food at restaurants, talking about your daily routine, and handling a simple conversation with someone. But the problem is the language itself. Luxembourgish is spoken almost entirely inside that one small country, so you can't practice it on the train in London. There aren't really any Luxembourgish films to watch, although correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And you probably don't know anyone who speaks it natively. I know I don't. Now, France asks for B2 level as of January 2026. It used to be B1 before then. And that is a serious level. You're going to be reading difficult texts, arguing a point in French, and following native speaker accents that you might not have heard before. But on the bright side, French is everywhere. It's easy to find tutors, films, a whole industry built around teaching French. And there's probably somebody within a mile of you who speaks it, not to mention the immersion that you'll have if you live in France for 5 years. So although the level is lower in Luxembourg, and there's almost nowhere to learn the language, in France the level is higher, and you have plenty of resources to help you learn. So which one is easier depends also on whether you're already living in the country, and of course, if you're able to get total immersion rather than somehow managing to live most of your life in English. Now, both countries also test your knowledge of the country itself and its history and laws, and this is another area where they split. In France, you have to sit a civics exam in French and you have to pass it. There's no way around this. It covers French history, how the Republic works, and France's place in the world, among other things. Now, Luxembourg has an exam too, but you don't have to actually sit the exam. You can choose to, or you can attend a short civics course instead and get your certificate that way. So that's going to be a lot less pressure for people, especially if you get anxious about exams. So France makes you pass an exam in French with no choice in the matter. But Luxembourg gives you the option to sit that course instead of going into the exam environment. So both countries will also refuse you if you have certain kinds of criminal record, and both make it very clear where that line actually is. So in Luxembourg, it draws the line at a prison sentence of 12 months or more. In France, it's 6 months without suspension. So France is actually the stricter of the two, which is the opposite of what a lot of people expect. Which brings us to the requirement that isn't really published widely. Now, on a French government website, on the page that explains the process to the people applying, the French state describes the process of getting French nationality as a favor granted by France to a foreigner. It isn't a right, and you don't earn it by meeting a list of conditions. The word the state itself uses is favor. Now, in May 2025, the French Interior Minister sent out a circular telling officials how to assess citizenship applications. Now, this isn't a law, and it doesn't change anything in the civil code, but it tells the officials how to interpret conditions that already exist in law. And what it tells them is that you have to show proven professional integration considered over the whole 5-year period with a steady income that's enough to live on. Put that next to the residency rule, and you can see what France is really asking for. Your 5 years of living there are not the be-all and end-all. That is just the point where they start looking at how you've supported yourself and how you've integrated over that period of 5 years. And it's possible that they can answer, you're not ready yet. And there's a specific outcome for that. They don't refuse your application, but they adjourn it. They impose a delay on you. And the reason they give can be, for example, to let you improve your work situation. So you get told to come back when you've done better. But if you do apply again before that delay is up, then you risk your file being closed without anyone actually looking at it. Now, Luxembourg doesn't have anything like this. It's much more by the book. You apply, you get an answer within 8 months. And if it is a no, you have 3 months to take it to the administrative tribunal, where a judge can replace the minister's decision with their own. France has a court as well, but you have to go to the minister first. That's a compulsory step. And you can wait around 4 months for a reply before you're even allowed to file. I've put the whole comparison of both countries into a free 1-page at-a-glance guide with both countries side by side, including every requirement and every deadline from this video, and the official government link so you can check everything for yourself. So if you're deciding between these two, having this will save you a bunch of time reading government pages that sometimes contradict each other, and the link to that is in the description. Now back to that Luxembourg condition, because you've seen everything else now, and you're in a good position to weigh it properly. Here's the condition in full, and it only applies to one route, that's residency for private reasons, which is the one where you move to Luxembourg and live on money that you already have from passive income. For that route, the money has to come from work you did in another EU or Schengen country, or from a pension paid by Social Security in one of them. So it cannot come from remote work outside that area, for example, from the US or the UK. So it's not like a typical digital nomad visa. It's not about your nationality. They're not shutting out US or UK citizens for being citizens of those countries. If you're a US citizen who spent 5 years working in Berlin, you can meet it. If you're British and you draw a Dutch pension, you can meet it. It only becomes a problem if your whole working life has been spent outside Europe, because an American salary history and an American retirement account are unlikely to count, no matter how substantial they are. But it does only affect this one route, this residency for private reasons route. Luxembourg is still open to you through a bunch of other ways to get residency, and plenty of people use them. So a job offer in Luxembourg works. So does a business, opening a business that needs you there in person to run it, or making an investment starting at 500,000 euros. Those are real routes that work, but they are a long way from what a lot of people picture when they imagine moving abroad on money they already have. Definitely keep that in mind so you don't waste time if it's not going to be a goer for you. So the paperwork narrows things down a lot. Luxembourg suits you if you can stay in one place, because that unbroken final year before you apply for citizenship is unforgiving, and having a job that moves you around the place is likely to cost you. Now, France suits you if you already have some basis in French, or if you're willing to learn it properly to B2 level. And it also suits you if you have or are willing to establish a long documented employment or self-employment history in France, because that's what that circular is actually looking for, and that's what a successful application will need. But there's another thing that is not in either government's paperwork, and I'd weigh it more heavily than any of this. France and Luxembourg have a lot of similarities, and we've gone over the administrative and bureaucratic differences, right? But at the end of the day, you're choosing where to live physically for at least 5 years, and probably longer than that, because most people make connections and end up staying for some time after they become citizens. Luxembourg is a tiny landlocked country, and it sits between France, Belgium, and Germany. Yes, it's wealthy. Yes, it's central, and you can be in a whole bunch of other countries before lunch, but it doesn't have a coastline, and there's not much variety inside its own borders. So you do run the risk of getting bored quickly. In contrast, France has got 2 coastlines. It's got the Alps, the Pyrenees, regional cultures that barely resemble each other. And once you're outside the big cities, you can find a lot of great places to live, affordable prices that Luxembourg just can't compete with. So in terms of the citizenship processes for the 2 countries, the gap between them in terms of time is starting at about 10 months, plus the risk in France of them putting your application on hold. Now, this is important and it's worth knowing about before you commit, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just 10 months. Set that against a decision about where you actually want to live, and you quickly realize what's more important. Now, if you're leaning towards France, then the potential extra time for the application is a cost that you pay, and you should be willing to pay it. But if Luxembourg still appeals to you, and you can meet the right residency route, and for a lot of people, the size of the country and its location are really appealing, then its faster and more by-the-book process is a bonus on top. So in short, a period of 10 months shouldn't decide which country you end up living in. Now, one last thing before you go, and it's the reason why some of you can ignore a lot of what I've just said about France. If you're planning to live in France, then there's one route worth knowing about that massively cuts down the years of residency. It's written into French law, and whether or not you qualify comes down to how you feel about going into higher education. Now, if that's you, the whole calculation in this video changes. I'm going to do a video about that next, so make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications if you want to catch it. It's a really interesting topic for those of you who are keen on moving to France for citizenship. And if you want to look wider than these 2 countries, then my EU Citizenship Navigator tool maps all the routes across the whole block against your own situation and your own personal goals, and you can find that link below as well. So let me know in the comments whether Luxembourg or France appeals to you more, or neither, and what's stopping you, because I read every single one of them and I sometimes use them to inspire new videos. Thanks so much for watching Digital Emigre, and I'll see you in the next one.